People of the internet, it's mighty fine. We are back for another weekly analysis. But before we dive into that, I'm going to do something a little bit different this week. I want to look back at what I talked about last week and how it played out, just so you can kind of see that this works and how to read the market on these high time frames as it develops. So what we're going to do is we're going to just look over the same list that we went over last week, excluding AUDJPY because it's just not one of my constants. And let's dive right in. So we're going to start with the US dollar. Last week, I said that if we break above this high time frame trend high, it's very likely that we're entering some sort of expansion phase. We'd be looking for a break and retest and then continuation of the trend to the upside. It's exactly what we got. If price breaks above this, obviously, then we know that we have expanded the trend past the previous highest point. That's exactly what happens. Price pushes right up into it, but we see a little bit of lacking momentum and volume. Price comes back down into a familiar price point here that gave us that big push to the upside and then expands even more. So this indicates to us that new buy orders have come in and the bullish trend has continued and has expanded. Moving into next week, that can also help us inform our decision, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Moving on to the next pair, AUDUSD, I said that if we break below essentially this low right here, we would expand the trend. Certainly did. I also mentioned that we should watch for a break of this H1 supply. You'll notice that price starts to kind of coil up here, and then it makes this big push to the upside, probably faking quite a few people out, but we knew that price was just coming right back into that H4 supply that I had talked about. We see an intraday transition here on the M15, the M30, the H1, so on and so forth, and then price just dumps and continues to go to the downside. Very nice, very clean move to go back and back test. But again, accurate high time frame bias plays right up into this high time frame level, transitions, and then continues to the downside. This was a nice swing opportunity. Looking at GBP USD, again, we had a downside bias. We said be careful as price comes back into this level. It's either going to be an immediate bounce or price is going to flood right through it. And of course, price just dumped right through it, right? Not too much of a pullback, very similar to what we saw on AUD USD. Again, correlates to our US dollar analysis as well. But we saw a slight break of like this H1, H4 supply here. Price pulled right back up into a level of liquidity over here. More orders came in, transition took place on the smaller time frames, as we can see, break retests here, and then price just started dumping on down. So another high time frame read that we can call accurate. Looking at GBP JPY, same deal. We said that if we break above that high time frame trend high, most likely going to happen early in the week, which it did. Big push to the upside. And now we can see that we've got a bit of a flow switch here. We broke that demand and sellers have started to step in, which means that we can time our next move as we look into our analysis that I'll be building and talking about later in this video. But again, high time frame bias was correct. Current leg was correct. We got this big push to the upside. And then as soon as we started to switch flow here and break this demand and then fail to follow through and go higher, that was a signal to start taking out some profits from this big move to the upside and maybe wait for the pro trend pullback. Looking at EURJPY, same exact deal. Price pushes above this zone here, big breakout to the upside. This is a good opportunity, not any really clean opportunities to get in terms of a break and retest. Price just took right off. But also, like we talked about last week in the analysis, I thought that price might just keep on booking. Price was accumulating a bit towards the supply, retesting this level as the level of liquidity or sellers got weaker. The more that it got tested, price just pops right above it. Now we're looking for some form of pullback relative to this behavior on our high time frames for our opportunity into this next week. Looking at gold, this one didn't work out exactly as planned, but let me walk you through why. My overall bias on this was that we would move upwards, and we did. This was our immediate move to the upside as the week started out. But what happened? As soon as price broke above this level, there was a pretty big sell-off, and that showed us that we might be getting some profit taking from the people that made that initial push. We got this transition here, break of demand and retest, and then big volume pushes to the downside. To me, this simply just means that we're getting a pullback relative to this larger leg here. So do keep this in mind. As price comes back into this area, very, very interesting breaker bounce that we will look at here in just a little bit. But what I'm trying to illustrate is we had this H4 break of flow, this H1 break of flow here. Demands were taken out. This is a strong sell signal for an intra-week bias or an immediate day-to-day bias once that H4 demand level was broken. Something, again, that I did highlight last week. If that H4 demand level were to break, we may see short-term selling relative to that current leg. Now, that's the recap. This is a new thing. I'm just testing the waters. Let me know in the comments if this is something that you like to see. You know, I don't know exactly what kind of content that you all who are watching enjoy, and the more feedback that I get from you, the better that the content will be on this channel, the more it will help people out. So without further ado, let's hop into this week's analysis. All right, so diving right into our current week's weekly analysis, we're going to start with that US dollar index. I've updated the charts a little bit here more appropriately heading into this week. And, you know, like I was just talking about, I think that we're going to see a bullish continuation of this trend. I've highlighted a few key levels for you. I think this H4 demand is one that you should certainly watch here. Overall, we are seeing this trend to the upside, right? And at some point, they're going to need more orders like we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. And that's just natural order flow of the market ultimately. If price breaks below this H4 demand here, then I think that we're going to see that retracement start. If so, I would watch this region here on my chart because I use the Dow Jones FXCM index. That's roughly 12500. Roughly. The reason why is this was an order accumulation that broke us into new trend highs. Also, I would watch closer down here towards like 12460, 12450 roughly for another major breaker bounce scenario at the daily demand. Overall, looking for this thing to continue up. However, if we break that H4 demand, I think that signals a slightly larger retracement against this leg from daily demand into our high time frame trend high. If price just cracks right above it, we're looking for follow through on our smaller time frames. If we see a push above and then an immediate transition on the H1 or even H4, then we know that we're probably coming into a bearish move heading into the week and a retracement against this leg here. So that can help us inform our bias both immediately and into the rest of the week. Overall, still bullish on the dollar. Watching this level as sort of the barometer to see which direction we will really trend in this week. Major breaker bounce here on the H4 demand. AUDUSD, obviously quite bearish. However, I want you to keep something in mind. As we look at the weekly chart, this big old eyeball down here is there for a reason. This is a very interesting level of demand, and I want you to be aware that as price comes into it, it's very likely that we're going to see buyers step in some fashion. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to get a trend reversal of all this pressure to the downside. However, if I had to pick a spot, my educated guess would be that in this region here is where you would see that pivot and intraday transition. It could take a few days, but maybe a transition into that pro trend bullish behavior again. However, immediately we are bearish, and that's the direction that you should take this thing right now. So we have this big expansion to the downside. We have this big bearish flow expansion to the downside here. We're looking for some sort of pullback, kind of like this. It could come back into a couple of levels as you look into the H4. I would say maybe further up here would be the best spot around 7,400 to 7,450 roughly. This daily supply up top is where the most recent voluminous orders came in that just made this thing absolutely melt. It's going to be important for this as well as GBP USD to keep an eye on the H1. This H1 supply here will show us if that pullback is starting. If this level breaks, that's a 15-minute, 30-minute transition. If this level breaks, our last real kind of push to the downside here on the H1, that would show us we're going to get a pullback against this whole leg, and we can time our entry idea based on that. So very important level to watch. Set an alert on that one. I highly suggest it. If price just keeps on falling to the downside, not a whole lot that you can do. If price immediately just comes back down into here, watch that weekly demand level for a transition on the H1 with follow through into the H4 daily, so on and so forth. If price breaks below the weekly demand, even if it just wicks below the weekly demand, it shows us that buyers at that level have been taken out theoretically. So that would be a very bearish signal, in my opinion. If we crack below the weekly demand, we're looking for essentially a break and retest, maybe on the H4 or even on the daily. It could get a little bit muddy, so I'll probably avoid this chart if we break that weekly demand. Excuse me, tongue-tied. If instead we see a transition in that area, I like that idea a lot, and I may switch into a more bullish bias. Immediately, I would say bearish, watch this level. We might get another leg looking at the H4, something like this, somewhere in here, some sort of pullback, and then an expansion below this into that weekly. Very, very good target zone for a further bullish move. Looking at GBPUSD, very, very similar outlook here. A little bit more bearish overall on the highest time frames. I mean, this thing's really been trending down. When we look at the weekly as well, the weekly flow had been broken all the way up here. It's been a bear market for a long time. Now, with that being said, we had this massive expansion here on Friday to the downside. Again, we need some sort of retracement relative to that. And when we look at the H4, there's not a whole lot to work with. We do have some supply levels to keep in mind if we get that retracement. But looking at the H1, I think this is a very, very good indicator. Again, 15-minute, 30-minute supply right here. If that's broken, we know to watch this for a breaker bounce scenario here. You may just get a retest of this and then transition and further push. So certainly watch this H1 supply region here. If price breaks above it, we get a retracement against the entire leg. Then we can time our next potential pro trend bearish entry idea if that level is broken. So major breaker bounce here. And if price just keeps on pushing into new trend lows, we just need some sort of pullback to get in and time it appropriately. So not the highest priority for me this week, but certainly very, very interesting. May get even more interesting as the week opens up. Obviously, when we get some data, really closely watching that H1 supply. GBP JPY, let's move back up to the daily. Like we just talked about in the beginning of this video, we did have this big expansion to the upside here. Our current trend leg has pushed up higher. I left this box on here from last week. I said we need to see some form of retracement relative to this trend leg. Our clearly bullish bias has held, which is good. And now I want you to watch this daily demand level here. I just made this red box. And then we look at the H4. I put a little zone here. Very interesting spot. All of my directional biases are always indicated by these arrows, right? So if price breaks above this H4 supply here, then we may be getting that transition early. Again, remember, overall pro trend is bullish. If we get a break above this and then a retest, I may look to take a bullish play out of that. However, I would much more prefer a bullish transition that taps into this daily demand, either the big box or this refined box within it, and then breaks the H4 supply and shows us that transition. Ideally, it might look something like a push down and then a retest back up here, our entry over here, and then a push back up into our targets like this H4 major supply or this high time frame trend high, or even an expansion to the upside. So we are in retracement mode, in my opinion, against the flow and trend on the daily and the weekly, which is great. This is a major breaker bounce here on the daily. If price goes below it, my immediate bias changes to bearish. But if price transitions from this level, I think it's a good pro trend bullish opportunity. Keep that in mind. EURJPY. So this one we looked at, this was a major level of supply. Price had been kind of just slotted up against it for a little bit and struggling. But this wick right here, and this is why wicks matter so much, guys. Buyers cracked above this and took sellers out. Now, everybody here probably thought, oh, rejection. Oh, it's not going up any further, right? The price continued to knock on the door and test it and eventually broke through. Now, we're looking for some sort of retracement relative to either this leg from our daily demand to trend high or from our weekly demand to our trend high. So if price breaks below daily demand here, then I think we come back into a more interesting area down here. Watch for a transition within that. I wouldn't necessarily take the short if daily demand was broken. I would just watch it. But if we got a pullback just relative to this leg, I think it's a good opportunity. Looking at the H4, we can already see a little bit of a break of flow here, that last demand that gave us that push to the upside. So we could be starting our retracement. Interesting little thing to watch. Nothing for me to do right now in terms of a continuation opportunity for a bullish position. If we get a pullback deeper into, say, I don't know, like 136,800 roughly, I think that could be a really good level to watch. Also, this wick down here, certainly keep that in mind. That daily demand level that gave us that last trend leg to the upside, very important. Again, as always, directional biases are indicated by these arrows. If price breaks below the H4, you could look for a short-term counter trend trade. Just be a little cautious because you are going against the momentum of the market. You may see a short-term opportunity, meaning the time horizon of your trade may be a couple hours or a day or even a day or two. But I would certainly watch the levels that I've talked about here for potential bullish transitions, as overall this thing is trending upwards. Last but not least, let's take a look at gold, or XAU USD. I talked about how this was an expansion outside of this this big range that we had here, and overall, when we look at the weekly, right, we're still pretty damn bullish. This could certainly be the intra-month or weekly or even day-to-day transition here to try and push into new highs. Things still haven't cooled down in the Eastern Bloc. Things are still hot as hell in Shanghai. There's still a lot of tension around the world. Commodities prices are going to stay high, right? It's a safe haven currency. So as price moves back into this sort of daily demand that I've highlighted here for you, I want you to just pay really close attention to that level that I have been highlighting here. If we see a transition in the first day or two of this week into H4 and H1 bullish flow, particularly from this level down here, right? Lots of liquidity here, then that may be a bullish opportunity. However, we talked about this last week too. If price breaks below all this liquidity and takes all these people out, this is still a very, very interesting level of demand to me. And I will watch something around the 1900 level for a potential liquidation or, liquidity engineering situation where price just wicks down and then transitions, gives us a quick maybe M30 or H1 transition into bullish flow. If instead price just breaks above this H4 supply, for example, maybe it taps in something like this, taps down here, and then transitions and breaks above this, I think this is a really good opportunity to take this back up into the 1980 region or even up into these trend highs. So do keep that in mind. I think we are deep in the retracement process right now. Immediate bias obviously is bearish. If you see this thing reject from your H4 supply and tap back into this level, then sell it back into here. But if price just taps right into the demand and then starts to push up, be a little bit cautious is all that I'm saying, because this level of demand is very important. There's a lot of buy indication from there. So again, just to recap, if price comes up into this, gives you some sort of transition, look for the retest and then the push past this into this area here where we have another major break or bounce. If instead price comes up and breaks above that, look for this retest into maybe the 1980 region or up into these highs here. If price breaks below this level of demand, you could sell it to here. It's just zone to zone trading. And that's pretty much what I do, right? I just highlight these major liquidity zones for myself and for my group and even for you guys publicly. And I trade zone to zone on these areas. Okay. So if you want to learn more about what I do, here's the spiel, mightyfinefx.com. Link is down below. I've also got that public Discord channel where this video goes early. For this week, it came out on Saturday, but YouTube gets it on Sunday. That Discord channel also gets charts. Sometimes they'll even get links to join me on my analysis. And hey, who knows? Maybe I'll drop a little educational nugget here or there. So make sure you join up on that. As you move into this next week, please do your homework. There's going to be some good opportunities, and trade smart and safe. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Give this thing a thumbs up. Let this thing spread to other people who need a good free resource that's not bullshit or fueled by sales of courses. This is for you. This is for the public, and I want you guys to engage with me and benefit from it. So until next week, trade smart, trade safe. Mighty Fine out.